Good afternoon. Welcome to the Owensboro Board of Commissioners special call meeting, January the 9th. This time I'd ask City Clerk Beth Cecil to please call the roll.
Commissioner Jay Bellotta.
Here.
Commissioner Larry Conder.
Here.
Mayor Tom Watson.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Bob Glenn.
Here.
Commissioner Pam Smithwright.
Here.
Thank you. At this time, we would ask for a consideration of a personnel appointment. Who's supposed to read this? Me?
Dan Mayor.
Randy Caldwell, probationary full-time non-civil service appointment to the telecommunicator with the police department effective January 22nd, 2018. I will make a motion to approve. Could I please have a second?
So moved. Second.
Any discussion? Okay, all in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Thank you all. Item number 4, ISO rating, Chief Steve Mitchell.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners.
Good afternoon, Chief.
How are you?
All right.
Chief Steve Mitchell. You might remember during the last budget process, I mentioned the insurance rating just a couple of times, maybe. And since that's coming up, we thought we'd give you a little update and a reminder on what this is all about. So ISO is the one that comes in and does the insurance ratings. And this is what the insurance companies use to establish their premiums. It's also used by the EDC and places like that for marketing. Businesses look at it. Basically, in a nutshell, if you have a good rating, your insurance premiums are low. If it's a bad rating, then you have higher insurance rates that all residents and commercial businesses pay. So,
Can you get ready to tell us what our rating is?
I'm getting to that, sir.
Okay.
I will.
And how good our insurance is?
Sir.
Good.
So this is what they collect. Now, one of these is new. So they go over the fire department capability, and I'll run that down here in a second, our 911 dispatch center, and how good our hydrants are, our water supply. Community risk reduction is new. Back when we got rated in 2011 and 12, this was not part of that. This adds 5% to the rating. This is a good thing for us. Because what this is the fire prevention efforts within the city, and I'm confident we're going to do very well in this area. We've been studying this over the last few months, knowing that this was coming up, and we do probably 90 to 95% of the things that they request that you do in a city already. So I'm looking forward to this part of the rating and see how well we do in that, because I'm really confident with that. So back in 2011, 2012, this is what the scoring looked like. Now, I didn't go through 1 through 9, but just the top 3 and how the scoring looks. And we came out back then at a 86.29, which is a very strong 2. Since then, they've changed the system and the rating system. So we'll go over that just a little bit. The fire department scoring, just like we've talked about in the deployment analysis, they'll ask what apparatus we have available. They'll go in depth in our operations and how we operate, how we respond to calls. Our pump capacity, that's the actual capacity of our trucks to be able to pump, how many gallons per minute. And this is the big one that we talked about in depth during the budget process, and that's the distribution of companies. So that's the compliance with the standards, meaning you have to be at that 90% that we talked about before, and actual response time. So one thing they're going to do different this time is there's more reliance on this part of it. So it's the weighting's heavier on this than it used to be. But they're going to give us, we're not only going to go by the computer modeling, they're also going to give us credit for what we're actually doing. So if our actual response times for structure fires over the last 3 years were a little bit better than what the computer modeling are, we'll get credit for that. So I'm interested to see how that turns out. They're also going to look at our staffing and our training. Now, one thing, our audit's going to be in February. Our 6 new personnel come on board in March. So usually what happens is they do your audit, and then it's several months before you actually hear back what your rating is. I will, of course, push strongly to get credit for the plan, which is the additional ladder truck and the 6 additional personnel to help our deployment. If that doesn't occur, if they won't give that to us now, probably what we'll want to do is in 2 years, request an audit, have them come back, and then so we will get credit for that, because you can do that in between the 5-year periods. And they also look at your training really strong, and that's your internal training and your outside training. But this is the new one. So one thing they're going to give us credit for now is adoption of fire code, which we have, fire code enforcement, which we do. We inspect all of our buildings annually, so you get credit for that. Fire prevention staffing. This one we're not clear on how that's going to go because our entire department are inspectors. We're 100%.
Yeah, you don't have just a specific
Right.
person.
Well, we have 2 FTEs, so we have 1 full-time and 2 part-time that are doing the bigger occupancies, but everything else in the facility, we've got over 2,000 buildings that we inspect every year.
Regular truck comes and does our office.
So we train them and certify them to do that. So it's going to be interesting to see how ISO looks at that. And then, of course, all of our fire prevention programs, our fire safety education courses. And one thing they actually give you credit for, which we have, is our ordinances. Remember, we've just changed our fire lane ordinance to where you can't park there 3 minutes anymore. We're actually going to get credit for the change in that ordinance in our ISO rating. So that's also a plus. So we look forward to that. So just in a nutshell, February 6th, they're going to be here. We're busy right now preparing for that. There's a lot of pre-work that they send you to get ready for that day, for when they show up. So the people working on this is the fire department, of course, 911 dispatch center, central dispatch. They're having to do work for this, and OMU is as well. And there's forms that everybody has to fill out, and we'll be ready for them to show up. And then hopefully around October, November, we'll hear what our new rating is. So any questions?
Yes, sir, I have a question.
Sure.
How does the 911 intertwine with this ISO?
So 10% of our rating is us getting the calls and be able to get to where we're going. So the dispatch center has to meet, there's a standard, and ISO looks to see if they're meeting that standard. So within that standard for dispatch is staffing, minimum staffing per day, maximum staffing, how many's on duty, how many calls they get into the dispatch center. And one thing they'll look at is not just fire calls. So what they want to know, there's actually a standard on if your center gets this, say they get 70,000 phone calls a year, whether they're emergency or not, that you have to have so many dispatchers on duty at a time to be able to handle those.
So I would like that report
Sure.
given to this commission. You don't have to do it out front, but just so that we could see, there's quite a bit of discussion about the 911 stuff. It'd be interesting to know an outsider's point of view.
And one thing, and Paul and A's we're working on putting the report together. One thing is good is, one thing is turnaround time. From the time you receive the call to the time that...
Are you talking about you receive the call or 911?
Well, from the time the 911 phone rings
Okay.
till the time they give it to us,
Okay.
and it dispatches, there's a certain amount of time you have to do that. We're meeting that a high percentage of the time. It's impossible to meet it 100% because there's sometimes you have to send it to that other phone to get translators and things like that. And sometimes those might be a little delayed. But I want to say the turnaround time's like 80 seconds or something like that, 80 to 90 seconds.
Well, I'd just like to see their final assessment.
And but yeah, so we'll have all that
Thank you.
available to you.
Anybody else? Mr. Condor?
Thank you, Mayor. Chief, the scoring that we're about to receive, does that include Davis County's fire department also? Are they involved
sir.
in this process?
No, sir.
No?
So the way that works is if you have automatic mutual aid with somebody, you can get credit for theirs and they can get credit for you. We only have automatic mutual aid with Davis County at one building, and that's the hospital. And the hospital receives its own rating because it's a healthcare institution as large as it is. It gets its own individual rating. So the hospital will get credit for that, but we as a city will not.
Now, there's about 30 questions on the credentialing thing every year on fire safety at the hospital.
Yes,
Anybody
that's
else?
correct.
Okay, Commissioner Glenn.
So, one question I have, the other day you had the fire at Jaeger Materials, but
Yes.
as I understood the description, the county showed up. You were there, but the county showed up, and they pretty much took the lead and I guess put the fire
Yeah,
out just because
so-
they got there first?
So what happened that day is, this was at the Jaeger that's out on, well, it's 144 now, or Old 60, or whatever.
Where they launched the
they call it
boats.
out there. So the fire was out there. They were at 2 other structure fires at the time. So they called the city for mutual aid. Plus, being on the river, it wasn't clear whether we'd need the fireboat or not. So we responded both ways, on the river and on land. We got there, initially took command, but the county, they were able to pull trucks away from another fire and get there and actually get it knocked down from shore. So as soon as they got there, we turned it over to them, and we stayed and supported them as long as they needed us. And once the fire was out, then we came back to the city.
Okay, well, it sounds like a great response. So my question is, you only have a mutual aid pact with them for the hospital. Would it behoove us, in terms of this OSO rating, to develop mutual aid pacts for other areas, like the airport comes to mind?
Yeah,
We had a
actually,
catastrophe at the airport.
Actually, we do. It's the mutual aid agreement. There's automatic mutual aid and mutual aid. So we do have mutual aid with the county altogether. And then we have automatic responses. So the hospital's an automatic response. The East Station of the county goes there for every alarm. The airport is automatic aid for, there's 3 levels of emergencies there. For 2 and 3, which would be the bad ones, we're automatic there. And then the county airport station is second alarm into our air park.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Do they have a ladder truck?
No, sir.
They want to buy one?
I asked.
Did you? Okay, thank you,
can-
sir.
Why don't you ask?
I don't know enough about it. Commissioner Velada.
Thank you, Mayor. Chief, with your experience and looking into your crystal ball, looking at our current rating, do you foresee with some of the upcoming additions of personnel and some of the things that we're doing that we could potentially have a better rating this time?
I do. I'm not sure it's going to happen this time because they're coming before. So the way ISO works is they always look at the previous 3 years as opposed to the year you're in. I'm going to do everything in my salesmanship possible to try to get credit for that. But what would happen is if they won't give us credit for what we're getting ready to do, is go ahead and get the rating. And then once we have 1 year of data based on the new deployment, is invite them back, which is rare because usually you don't want to invite ISO in, but that'll be a case where we will want to invite them in. I actually talked to them this morning, and they said they will consider that because even though they come in February, the rating period actually goes through the summer. So they're going to consider that.
Perfect. Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, anybody else?
Nice. Go ahead,
Commissioner
sir.
Smith Wright, please.
Thanks, Mayor.
You're welcome.
When you had the EMTs here that day, and we were talking about how well they respond and all that stuff, will that go toward the rating?
Unfortunately not, and I'll tell you why. ISO is property insurance only.
Oh, okay.
So all they care about are the buildings. And so structure fire. So like when we do, like when they talk about response times, even though our deployment, we consider both for EMS and fire, all they care about is the fire side.
Okay.
Commissioner Condor.
Thank you, Mayor.
Yeah.
In regards to the mutual aid agreements again, as an example, we look at a new building that's being built just off of Frederica Street, across from Texas Roadhouse, the new hotel, not in the city. Yet you have a mutual aid agreement in which what is Station 5, I assume, would be the closest to that, even though it's not in the city. So that individual, though, looked at that and goes, why should I? If you're going to have a mutual aid agreement and I'm going to take advantage of your ISO rating that you're going to get by all the great things we're doing, why should I be part of the city?
Actually, they don't. So that hotel, the one you're talking about.
Yes.
Their insurance rating will be based on a 6 instead of a 2. So even though we have mutual aid with them, their insurance will probably be, I'd hate to think, it's probably going to be at least 50% higher than the Super 8
Very good.
across the street.
Thank you, sir.
And we've told them that.
Maybe he's got a brother in the insurance business, who knows? Anybody else? Okay, thank you, Chief. Well done
right,
as
thank you.
usual. At this time, we'd like to move on to item number 5, sports tourism. Ms. Amanda Rogers, please.
Thank you, Mayor. I
You're
appreciate
welcome.
the opportunity to share the good news about the sports tourism impact that was generated from events hosted at your City of Owensboro Parks and Rec facility this year. Let me remind you that the mission of Parks and Rec is really threefold. Our first and foremost goal each year is provide quality of life opportunities, a wide variety of recreational opportunities for our local citizens. Secondly, we look to provide green space. We want to make sure that we can maintain green space within the City of Owensboro for future generations. And third, we look to see what we can do to help support our local economy. And that's what I'm going to hit on and talk about today. So we accomplish this by helping recruit and host events that draw visitors here to Owensboro. We work to secure dollars earned in other communities travel here to Owensboro and get left here in Owensboro. So how do we do that? We hosted 93 sporting events at your City of Owensboro recreational facilities. Those are events that were hosted at the Rudy Mines Mountain Biking Trail, at the Edge Ice Center, the Owensboro Softball Complex, Wayman Morris Football Complex, and other locations within our park system. Again, those are 93 sporting events that focus on activities when we draw people from out of town. Those are not our local league play, that's not our youth sports leagues. Those are just events and tournaments that draw visitors from out of town. In those 93 sporting events, we had over 1,500 teams that traveled from more than 22 states here to Owensboro, Kentucky, furthest being from Oklahoma and California this last year. And in room nights alone, in those room nights that we could definitively track, coinciding with those 93 sporting events, we had 12,158 room nights. And at room night revenue generated from those over 12,000 rooms, that's $1.3 million of new dollars brought into your economy. So let's look at how that works. Clearly, it starts with the city subsidy of your recreational facilities. That's a $4.4 million subsidy in the last budget year. That subsidy helps to operate all recreational locations within the City of Owensboro, and those are for use and benefit of our local citizens. But additionally to that use and benefit for our local citizens, we drive that tourism dollar. So that helps to support athletes and visitors coming here to Owensboro, bringing those monies that they earned in their hometowns and leaving them here in Owensboro. Then as that money is left here in Owensboro, it recycles in our economy. So let's look at kind of how that recycle works, how that works. Basically, again, it all starts with the city subsidy, the local tax dollars spent to support these locations for our local citizens, which in turn can also generate sports and recreational tourism. Those dollars turn into those facilities and locations that draw athletes and visitors from other areas throughout the state of Kentucky and throughout the U.S. Those people bring those dollars they've earned in their hometowns, and they pay for hotel rooms, gas, incidentals, they buy concessions, they eat while they're here. And as those dollars are left here in Owensboro, they become occupational taxes. They become payroll, salaries for our service industry employees. They become revenue for local businesses. And as those monies are paid out to our citizens who work in these service industry fields, those monies get spent on groceries, taxes, and local citizens' incidentals. So what does that look like monetarily? This bar graph kind of shows that. Again, for the next couple of slides, Mayor, I'm going to show you the industry standard formula that we use. And that's the $4.4 million subsidy that turned into over $14.5 million by that formula given to us in the last calendar year. Now, what exactly does that look like? Again, the 4.4 is the total subsidy to operate your park system. That's all 960 acres, 27 facilities. Yes, sir.
Well, go ahead. I just want to ask you a question about that.
Okay.
Does that go ahead and
Go
finish
ahead.
your counting of all the things that go into that.
Okay. I'll go ahead now and answer your question.
What other subsidies are you including? Public Works, straightening all the streets, police, fire, sanitation?
A
Where
lot
do
of
they-
that, yes, sir.
Un momento, ¿sabes
I'm
qué?
sorry.
Where does that figure into this 4.4? Is it part of that, or do you categorize these other things in another way so that we can see just how much the airplane show? You know, we know that's got X number of dollars in it. So I'm trying to quantify
Yeah.
everything that goes into putting on, 'cause I've been to 1,000 of these ball things,
Right.
and I see police, fire, public works, streets, sanitation, and whatever else, so,
Yeah, I would dare say more than 90% is included in that subsidy.
okay, that's fair
Because
enough.
how my budget works, I'm a customer of Public Works. So every year, they charge me, and it's within my budget already worked in those expenses.
Okay.
Within my budget, I put in the money that I will pay out to OPD to work my events. I put in the money that I will pay out. I don't think I pay fire. So I think fire is going to be the one area that's open that's outside of that.
Get your pencil out there, Chief.
But typically, the way we do our budgeting, there's internal service funds. So I act like a
Okay.
customer, just like a homeowner that gets a bill every time that Public Works comes to my property to do
So
work.
that's taken out of the 4.4.
That is
That's
included
figured
within.
in.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes,
That's
sir.
good enough for me.
Yeah. The blue column there represents the new dollars that are generated by your tax investment, those dollars that are earned outside of Owensboro, brought back into our town. And the green represents that recycled dollar. So that's the 14.5 million plus each time that the state states that dollar would recycle within our community. So let's talk about where that formula comes from, because I know there's been some questions about that formula in the past, and I want to address those, Mayor. But that formula comes from the State of Kentucky Tourism Department. They generate a dollar amount per day for an overnight visitor and for a local tourist that might be participating in an event. And they do that by region within the state of Kentucky. So that's kind of an industry standard. We utilize that industry standard so that we can have some consistent comparisons year over year and consistent comparisons from community to community within the state. Now that formula, what it directly looks like, it takes into account the number of teams that you have in an event, by the number of people that are associated with that team, by the number of days an event's held, by this set dollar figure. And currently the dollar figure that the state's given us for our region in Kentucky is $189. Keep in mind that dollar figure is higher in the Lexington, Louisville area. So what does that look like? At the state industry formula, it's a 229% return on investment, which is really significant. Now, Mayor, I know there's been some questions about this formula, so I want to address that. And I want to say that the formula does not take into account every fan that travels to an event. So I know many of you that sit on the commission have traveled with your children or with your grandchildren to sporting events and activities. You've gone and you've participated in these events similar to what we're discussing today. You know that when you travel out of town, you stay in a hotel room, you might stop at the gas station, maybe someone forgot a headband or a pair of socks and you're at the academy purchasing those things, and you're eating out. So that accounts for all those things, but it does not account for the fans. It only accounts for coaches and players and a minimum head count based upon the age group and the type of event that we're discussing. So if you perceive potentially that this formula is inflated, let's look at it at 50%, and let's look at what a return is at 50%. I've taken that same chart that I showed you earlier. We still have that $4.5 million subsidy, that subsidy that we use to operate all of our acreage, all of our facility, that in turn provides this benefit for sports tourism to our economy. And at 50%, we see that we generate $7.25 million. That's still a really significant return on investment. And Mayor, if my 401k returned like that, I might not be standing in front of you today doing this presentation. So understand that we have an investment that we provide for our local citizens that turns into this additional investment for our economy.
Can I ask you one quick question?
Yes, sir.
In relationship to finance? She's really got something going good. Go ahead. I'm just curious. So then I would assume that our net profits tax would increase by 7.25 million. If they generated all that, all these businesses got all that extra money, someone that would be listening to this that really didn't kind of get it, but it appears that all of a sudden, our community has $14.5 more million in it, or 50% of that 7.25. Is that, you know what I'm saying? Is it, and I know it probably doesn't make any sense to anybody else, but that's what I see it as. So you want to,
Well, Mayor, I'd say that a lot of these recreational facilities have been around for years. You know, the Owensboro softball complex has been around since, gosh, the early 90s. The Edge Ice Center, even though it's a new facility, we've done hockey in our community through our old ice arena for years. So you're not going to see a direct, immediate hit to our budget and to these occupational taxes, because these are things that we have been doing for many, many, many years, and that we have grown over time here in our community.
no, I guess I misstated it, I guess.
I'd like to address it, if you
Sure.
would, Mayor. And then certainly the details Angela can go into. But first and foremost, $7.5 million into our economy does not relate to $7.5 million into the general fund of the city of Owensboro. What you got to take into consideration is two things. One is this is a consistent amount of revenue. It grows every year a little bit depending on how many things that they have. So what you see in your annual budget already accounts for the fact that we are depending on Amanda, the CVB, the hotels, the various tourism agencies to bring that money into our community as it filters through you eating at the restaurant. So you eating at the restaurant, that waitress gets whatever they make, let's just say after tip and everything else, it's $10. That $10, the city would get the 1.78% after they've paid their taxes and their deductions and everything else that comes out of that. So that was $10 of that amount of money for your dinner that went to that waitress, divided by the fact that you've got many people that they're being served. So first and foremost is that money is already counted into the budget, and we're dependent on her to grow that each year. And we count in a growth percentage every year into the new revenue projections for the city of Owensboro. So there's a lot of pressure on Amanda and her team to not only maintain, but to grow it based on what we've projected. So that $7.5 million does not relate to an increase, equivalent increase into the budget. Now, the multiplier, as you look at that, there's different ways to look at that too. One of the things is that that money directly comes into the city of Owensboro and it gets utilized. And each time that dollar comes around, it's a lower percentage of that dollar that gets utilized. But a lot of those businesses, that's revenue that they also have counted on every year, and that's already figured into what we got from net profits and things from them last year. So the really important way to look at this is to maintain your current revenue source. We've got to hit these projections and get that money continuously flowing into the city of Owensboro, or we're not going to continue to hit the revenue stream that you have today. So anything that we add to this, it does add to the city's general revenue fund, but most importantly, it's a community growth. The whole pie grows as all that money filters in from the tourism.
that's my question. How do you quantify how the whole pie grows?
Well, the whole pie in this particular case.
No, not, you said the community. I'm talking the whole pie, not our pie.
Yeah, in this case, the whole pie is that the reason for the formula itself certainly is not to see how much has the city's coffers grown because of the tourism. That financial impact is a direct return on investment. That pie sustains or grows to that $7.5 million. And depending on what school of thought you're in, on how the economic multiplier works in your community, it's as much as $23 million. So when you want to quantify that formula is the quantifying element to determine what did $4.4 million invested into your parks, recreation, green space equate to in making the entire pie of the community bigger. And in this particular case, in Owensboro, as she talked about, there's a lot of factors that don't go into this formula. I would say that that's a fairly conservative number because this is a sports town and fans do come out from around the various counties and from Davis County into the city of Owensboro when we hold these events. And those spending, that local dollar spending is not included in these numbers. So when you want to know how big the pie was grown from a $4.4 million investment, the formula would say it's the $23 million that there as a multiplier.
Well, I hope you don't think I'm against sports or tournaments. These are questions that people ask us. I know they ask me, you know, when you come out with these numbers, how in the world did that, well, you got this adult softball tournament coming, and Jared said it's going to generate whatever it was, let's just say $5 million that weekend. People laugh about that. That's why I think it's worthwhile to have Austin hear all this and write a really good article to explain this formula so that people would understand that as we invest $4.4 million in our parks, there is a legitimate formula to go by to see how the pie gets grown. I've coached a long, long time. I'm not against any of this. Bless you. I just think as a group, we should make sure we can explain this. And if you believe in the formula, it's easy to believe. But I just think we need to do a better job of getting that out so the public can really understand it.
No, Mayor, I appreciate that very much. And I take you back as one really visible explanation of how this cycles through is that previous slide that I had hit, how we start with the subsidy and how that turns into the new dollars from other locations that get left here in Owensboro by spending at all these locations and how that turns into local dollars spent.
Vote for that.
But to leave the discussion of money and talk about the other benefits that come from the sports tourism, there are several other benefits that come from sports tourism. When you look at that, we really spread the word about OBKY, Mayor. We look at and we take Owensboro from not just a spot on the map that people weren't aware of anymore, but now we've really become a community to those people that travel here to Owensboro. And it's not just an understanding that myself and my team have as we're primary customer service there, but it's also all the city departments, because nothing that we do that's of large size can be done by my labor staff alone. We get involved with fire and police, as you mentioned, and public works, and each of those employees that work and have that one-on-one interaction with a visitor from our community, they understand the value of that interaction. And so we all strive on a regular basis to try to leave each of those visitors with an exciting experience, a great memory, something that they take back home and they talk about Owensboro and they spread the reputation of Owensboro throughout the U.S. Another thing that's a benefit and an impact that we receive from the sports tourism is we in the Parks Department are growing tomorrow's workforce. One thing that myself and my team takes very seriously is that we have typically on any given day about 150 to 165 employees. And currently I have 161. 105 of those 161 employees have never worked before. We are their job training. We are teaching them what that employee relationship looks like, what those expectations should be, and how to be a good employee. And we take that very seriously. In addition, Mayor, we really help to create a sense of place. We're placemaking for our community. We help people understand what the feel of Owensboro is, what the sensation of our community is. And we've seen that as we've been recognized, and we're starting to create an identity here within Owensboro through awards like Playful City, as Ed mentioned, Sports Town, being a KLC Enterprise City. But as I mentioned before, none of this is possible without the full team and city support. We have a great group of directors in the city currently that work to support one another in all of our efforts and the overall umbrella and the vision and the mission of the city of Owensboro. In addition, we work regularly with the CVB and the sports marketing director there, Jared Bratcher. Of those 93 events, he recruits about 20 of those to our facilities a year. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention my amazing staff of facility managers and my labor team and the hard work that they do and the value that they put into the customer service that we provide. But most importantly are you coaches. You sit there and you make the game plan for me every year, so I appreciate your support and your vision and your leadership, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, you're the expert, we're coaching. So we're going to put you in first inning. What would be the first thing you do to really put us on the map for sport? I have my idea, but I'm just coaching. So what would you do? What would you do? What would you think would be the best thing we could do?
Well, Mayor, I don't think there's any shortage of wonderful ideas.
Oh, don't fill a follow around. Come on out with it. Let's go.
I think there's a shortage of finances to do some of the great things. But I think
I'm not talking finances.
We've got some
What's
improvements.
Your idea?
We've got some improvements to make at some of our facilities. One of our primary tourist destinations for athletic and sports tourism is our Owensboro softball complex. We're a 4-field complex with a 5th practice field location. And when you go and you travel and you look at facilities similar to ours, that location has some weaknesses in comparison to newly built locations. So if we want to stay competitive in that game, I promise you, if you get someone to come to Owensboro, they're not going to leave with a bad taste in their mouth from the customer service, not just at our location with my team, but at the hotels and at the restaurants. We have a wonderful community that supports these sports events and the tourism. But I think when you look at field conditions, dugout conditions, the fact that we don't have a grandstand stadium, those things do affect tournament directors making decisions on where
You
to
don't have a
take those
safe place
events.
for them to go in case of a storm either, do you? You have to go get
No,
in
we
your
don't.
car?
We don't have a playground. We don't have a spray park, which many locations have. So that
Well,
when
that'd be your top thing, is to try and see what we could do at Fisher Park.
because that facility serves April through October. It has the largest playing season, and it has probably the largest group of players that you can recruit between softball and
In
baseball.
all ages.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Anybody have anything? Commissioner Glenn.
Thank you. All right, so we're doing foot golf. I know we're expanding some of the opportunities at our golf course, but the question I've got is, and I get this question a lot from folks, is, yes, you could try to add another wheel spoke out at Fisher or do something to expand those to attract larger tournaments. But what about taking, and this is a citizen's view, taking Eastern Little League, Western Little League, some of these smaller facilities, upgrading them so that you could use them for spillover for that age group? Is that a better investment of our park and recreation dollars than building another 4-field or 5-field wheel spoke? Now, having said that, I've been to E-Town, I've been to Bowling Green, and yes, they're full, they're busy, and they're beautiful facilities, you know.
You know, I think anytime that you can put things under one roof, there's some cost savings for management and operations and capital in the future. I'm more opposed to looking at putting things, developing locations under many locations, many roofs. I don't think that that would probably necessarily be the best way for us to spend our dollars. In addition, if I'm a tournament director, I want to minimize those locations that I have to have a team of people spread out to operate my event. So I think if we can put things in one location, that would suit us better in the future.
Okay, and then the other question is, we have existing facilities, you know, like Thompson Berry Soccer Complex. One of the two hot new sports that are growing at the high school level nationwide are lacrosse and wrestling. Now, the nice thing about wrestling is you just need a place to put the mats, and you're good. Lacrosse is a lot like soccer, and I think you could cross-utilize our soccer fields for lacrosse tournaments, and lacrosse is growing across the state of Kentucky. So have you looked into that?
We have. Jared Bratcher, myself, and the Davis County Parks Department team, we sat down about 6 months ago and kind of came up with a game plan of some areas that we felt like we have room for growth in. And we created a list of how we want to go about trying to recruit some of those events. Now, the trouble with lacrosse is it's the egg before the chicken. How do we get that started here? So we really need to find a group of people locally that can help support the growth of a youth lacrosse league. And as the Kentucky High School Athletic Association takes that on and grows that sport, we will see that in turn grow locally through the school systems as well. We do know that that's out there, and we're looking at how to work with that. We've been in contact with Elizabethtown, who has done a couple of lacrosse events each year for the last 2 years.
Thank you, Mayor.
You're welcome. Anybody else? Excellent, Amanda, as Ms. Rogers, as always.
Thank you,
Very
Mayor.
informative, very accurate. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor.
You're welcome. Okay.
Can we not bring up the chicken?
Do what?
Go ahead, Mayor.
I wasn't here. Did you have a problem with something? Okay, here we go. We'll get, animal control is a project of the county. City project list. Assistant City Manager / City Attorney, Ed Ray.
Thank you, Mayor. And all of you have the project list in front of you, and if you have any questions on that, we'll be happy to answer those.
I have one, and I'll wait my turn if somebody else has anything they'd like to say. I don't.
Well, you know my favorite, Gabe's Tower.
Commissioner Gillian, would you like to speak?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Mayor. I apologize.
That's quite all right.
Mayor, if you could recognize Steve Lynn to respond on that.
I recognize him. He's sitting right there. Hey, Steve Lynn.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
In response to Gabe's Tower, as the report that we made last week indicates, was that we had been requested to to have a sit-down with Mr. Zimmerman, who is the current owner of the tower. He actually called, scheduled an appointment, and there were about 3 or 4 of us that were sitting there waiting, and he never did show up for the meeting. So right now we're kind of back to square one as to basically looking at the tower in terms of property maintenance, things along those lines. But if you have any other questions or things that you would bring up in regard to that, I'd be glad to try to answer what I could. But we've not had a discussion with Mr. Zimmerman in several weeks at this particular point in time.
Well, my only question is, are there any hard and fast deadlines coming up that he needs to meet?
There are no hard and fast deadlines at this particular time. It was, like I said, it was much of a surprise to us that he did not show up for the meeting, because it was something that he had been pushing for some time, and it was a disappointment to us, because we're always wanting to go forward, do something, in regard to the tower and the complaints that we get from those that live in that area.
Yeah, the question begs itself: have we approached him about rescheduling the meeting? Had the flu or something?
We have not. That's a possibility, but I know Mr. Zimmerman is well aware of our telephone number, and of course we've got his as well. The issues that we run into is, especially Ed and myself, is that us being attorneys and knowing that he's been represented in the past by an attorney, we're kind of prohibited from contacting him. So we did send letters to the 2 attorneys that has represented him in the most recent months, and have not heard anything yet as to whether they still represent him. But we have looked at going forward, but we've not had any discussions with Mr. Zimmerman at this time.
Thank you.
Anybody else? I have update on the, gotta get the name right, the International Bluegrass Hall of Fame and Music Center. Is that right?
I think that's very
Close.
close to their most recent. That's right. And if I can clarify, just for those listening, the Bluegrass Museum Board did meet last quarter, and they have changed their name, and you'll see that in their marketing, their branding, their logos, to more represent what they thought was the draw, and that is the Hall of Fame. Like the Country Music Hall of Fame, the Football Hall of Fame, those things. So Hall of Fame is more prominent in their name, which they'll go forward and market from here forward. Mayor, I guess there's 2 pieces to an update for Bluegrass. One is, how is the construction going? And then 2 is, what about the Bluegrass Museum folks themselves? And on the construction side of the house, the deadline for, or the substantial completion date was January the 2nd. That has come and gone. The new substantial completion date is set for February the 2nd. That has been updated by the contractor this morning. Of course, between January 2nd and February 2nd, there's $2,400 a day penalty to the contractor for not being on time. And most of that delay is based on various subs that simply didn't meet their deadlines in a very tight schedule. But one that was agreed upon by the contractor. The time was scheduled to be made up after the bankruptcy, and they shot and gave it their effort, but didn't make it. So we are in a liquidated penalties phase of the contract, and there are elements of the museum that still need to be finished. The most prominent, of course, are the phenolic panels on the outside that you see, and the glazing. Glazing delay, or the glass on the front and back side of the museum, impacted a lot of different things. Impacts the ability to heat and cool and regulate the temperature in the building, which then also is things like drywall, mud drying, glue, paint, all those kind of things also go into play there. So that is continues to be under construction. The new date, February 2nd. The audiovisual package, which is basically all theatrical portion of that's been awarded. And Clare Brothers, which is a prominent national firm that's going to be doing all that, is building out their pieces at their shop, and they'll be on site in the next 2 weeks. The integration package, which is basically the electrical and drywall and everything needed to take a big empty space and then make it into the museum. That is came in way over budget, and went back to all the bidders. They've submitted their new bids. The price came down about $205,000 based on the fact that the museum took out several different displays and changed some things around to make that package a little bit smaller, and we, really put the pressure on the contractor to look at that price. So the integration package is still over budget, and we're getting some new pricing on that now. The museum design build-out, that's the stuff that when you go in the museum you actually see. It's the displays, it's the cool graphics, it's all the bells and whistles. That has gone back out. They've come back in, and that's closer to budget, and we'll be awarding that here shortly. The move-in date for the Bluegrass Museum and operational opening is set for October. So those dates will meet the museum's dates. So that time frame works for what we're doing in the construction side. Then that basically gives you a example where we are for the building. Now the third floor, that's finished to the point where it's completely done besides cleanup, which is the area for the restaurant. Now that kind of brings us to, that's where we are from a construction perspective. Yes, sir.
I just want you to get a little closer to the
No
mic.
problem.
'Cause you
Usually
start leaning back and you get away from it. Yeah.
And where do we see the Bluegrass Museum itself in getting from where they are today to opening this facility in October? There's a mountain of work to be done. It's most now labor intensive for the Bluegrass Museum and Hall of Fame. Their IT packages that they need to put together, their FF&E, all their things like their maintenance contracts on their elevators and the HVAC and the sprinkler inspections, and hiring their staff and programming out their grand opening, integrating their audio, visual, oral history projects that they're doing with UK. All of those things are in their boat. Our staff is helping to identify an issue spot for them as best we can, but those are all responsibilities of the Bluegrass Museum. And we'll continue to remind them of the different things that, from our perspective, they need to be doing on their end to make October a really outstanding date. I think their latest budget that they've submitted is extremely aggressive. They've got a lot of work to do in order to program out all of the things that they need to program in that space to meet their budget. And I know that the museum board and Chris Joslin certainly are aware of that, and they're working to get to where they need to be. I think the key as we look forward on this, not only on the construction side of things, which takes partnerships. It takes partnerships with these subs, who most all of the subs are local, the roofing companies and the glazing and all those things. But it also takes partnerships on the operational side of things, making sure that the Bluegrass Museum folks have everyone's support in how it's marketed and how it's shared through things like the chamber, and how well their staff integrates with making decisions and for the best of our community with the River Park Center and with the Science Museum and with the Convention Center and even the Heinz Center, of all these other venues that do some of the similar things that they're going to try to do. So there's a ton of work and labor-intensive work to be done between now and the time they open. But Mayor, our staff is ready to help them wherever we can. But the mountain is yet to be climbed, I think, on the side of the Bluegrass Museum. So I'll certainly answer any questions that may have brought up.
Commissioner Smith-Wright. You're welcome.
You said the opening date is in October. What was the original?
Originally, they were going to have a soft opening sometime late spring and then open during romp. But they came back to us and said that they cannot make those dates work. And from a staffing perspective, they can't accomplish romp and give justice to an October opening date. And all things considered, that's not a bad situation for anyone, given the fact that the contractor's behind schedule at this point in time. So that does work well, and it gives two opportunities for a big, impressive impact of bluegrass on our community. And one of the things, though, that's key to that opening date is, at least it has not been revealed to us, they don't have a restaurant yet identified.
Question.
And according to our contract, they have to have a restaurant operational before they're allowed to open. And the key to that, not necessarily the restaurant, but it's the revenue stream in their budget, occupying a facility owned by the taxpayer, to make sure that they have the revenue stream in place to properly maintain that building owned by the city of Owensboro and ultimately the taxpayers here in the city.
So ultimately, if October we don't have a restaurant, it doesn't open.
Ultimately, in October, if there's no restaurant, then a decision will have to be made by this commission. But I really go back to the issue of partnerships at that point in time. I think between now and then, it's all entities involved with making downtown successful in Owensboro should work really hard to support Chris and his team in trying to find the best match for that space. Again, it's the revenue stream that's key. And it doesn't mean it just has to be necessarily a restaurant. Plugged to our convention center can cater any meal or event or anything over there at that facility. And they do a fantastic job at it. What I think they need to do from the museum side of the house is concentrate on making their mark in their revenue projections. And that may be thinking outside the box for them. Which I think with the help of our staff, the help of people like the Chamber and the EDC and the Visitors Bureau, and our Blake over at the Convention Center, if all those folks get together, we can make that happen.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ray. Anything else to come before this group this morning?
Mayor, if I could, just
Sure.
two quick things. One, I wanted to just let everybody know that the property taxes that were due are past due at this point in time. And for those that are listening or friends and family, if for some reason you don't recall having written your property tax check, you need to contact the city of Owensboro, because the deadline before your name gets published in the newspaper as a delinquent taxpayer, and then we start our collection actions, it's Tuesday, January 16th at 5 o'clock. So if the credit card or the check or whatever hasn't been processed by Tuesday at 6 o'clock, nothing we can do. Then that name and that property address or that entity, that business gets published in the newspaper that following Sunday. So I just encourage you all to just make sure that you paid those. And last thing I'd mention is that we're finishing up that last round for leaf collection. And between now and February the 14th, it's an on-call basis. So if the weather's warming up now and you're getting those last leaves out, call 687-4444. Let them know that you have finally gotten your leaves to the sidewalk, and we'll come around and pick those up. But if the report isn't made by February the 14th, then you'll have to bag them up or dispose of them on your own. So just wanted to have that update while I had the opportunity.
Thanks, Ed. Ms. Hammer, what's the number of, how much is still owed in property tax that we haven't collected yet? Over 5?
I'm not sure the exact amount dollar-wise, but we're sending out about 1,200 notices.
It's right about $600,000 for real property taxes, and it's about $60,000 a couple of days ago for tangible. But our finance department, because tangible is almost all businesses, and our finance department has reached out to almost all of those, and they have really generated the collection process going. So they have shrunk, the finance department's efforts have shrunk considerably. But that's 2 pages of names versus 1,200 individual property owners, businesses, rental property folks.
I was
those
going over last night, a bunch of rental property in there. I mean,
There are, and we have that every year, and it's unfortunate, and a lot of times when push comes to shove and some of these folks realize that their escrow account didn't pay it, or their property maintenance company should have been taking care of that thing, it still is on the property owner. You know you own property in the city of Owensboro. Just give a call to 687-8888 and say, hey, this is my address. Am I good to go? And we'll give you the
If I
information.
could get might be able to get a little help from our M&I before the 12th as well to give them a little boost, because there might be a few people didn't watch us today. I don't know why, but.
Well, we'll certainly put it out. Now, the penalties and interest are still accumulating. Those are applicable. Nothing we can do about that. But it's a big difference between that and then being published in the newspaper and going to collections.
Okay. Thank you, sir. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, staff, for coming here. Appreciate you. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion